The autumn leaves crunched beneath the boots of Troop 142 as they hiked through Oakwood Forest. The air was cool and crisp, perfect for their weekend adventure. William, a tall 16-year-old with sandy hair and freckles, led the group along the narrow trail. As senior patrol leader, he took his job seriously, keeping an eye on the younger scouts who followed behind him. "Water break," William called, stopping in a small clearing. The boys gratefully dropped their heavy backpacks and reached for their water bottles. While the others rested, twins Oliver and Henry ventured a bit further ahead. They were always curious, always exploring. "I'm telling you, those red berries are poisonous," Oliver said, pointing to a bush. "No way," Henry argued. "Tom from Troop 89 ate some last summer and he was fine." Their friendly argument was cut short by something unexpected. Henry froze, grabbing his brother's arm. "Look there," he whispered, pointing to a fallen oak tree nearby. Beneath the massive trunk, partly hidden in a hollow formed by the roots, was a small figure. It was a boy, much younger than any of their scouts. He sat huddled against the dirt, knees pulled up to his chest. "William!" Oliver called, his voice cutting through the forest quiet. "Come quick!" William and Scoutmaster Thomas rushed toward the sound. When they reached the twins, Thomas put a finger to his lips, signaling them to be quiet. The child looked terrified, like a frightened animal ready to bolt. "Hello there," William said softly, kneeling at a distance. He kept his voice gentle and calm. "I'm William. We're Boy Scouts. Are you hurt?" The little boy stared back without answering. He was small, probably no older than 6, with dirt smudged across his cheeks and dried tears leaving tracks through the grime. His blue jacket was torn at one sleeve, and his sneakers were caked with mud. He trembled despite the jacket, his eyes wide with fear. For a long moment, no one moved. The forest seemed to grow quiet around them, as if holding its breath. Then the boy spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy said don't move." Those 4 simple words sent a chill through the group. William exchanged a worried glance with Scoutmaster Thomas, who carefully moved forward and knelt down beside William. "What's your name, young man?" Thomas asked gently. The boy hesitated, looking between the scouts with uncertainty. Finally, he whispered, "Jack." "That's a good name," Thomas said with a warm smile. "How long have you been here, Jack?" Jack pointed upward toward the sky. "Since the sun was high up there." William checked his watch. It was nearly 5 o'clock now, with the sun hanging low in the western sky. If Jack had been here since midday, that meant he'd been alone for hours. And where was his father? The younger scouts had gathered behind them now, whispering among themselves. Thomas gestured for them to step back, giving Jack some space. "Are you thirsty, Jack?" William asked, slowly reaching into his side pocket for his extra water bottle. He held it out, not approaching any closer. Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on the bottle. After a moment's hesitation, he crawled forward slightly and took it. His small hands shook as he unscrewed the cap and took eager sips. "Good job," William encouraged. "Can you tell us anything about your daddy? Where did he go?" Jack lowered the bottle, his lip trembling. "He told me to hide here and not move until he came back or until someone safe found me." His voice broke on the last words. "You've done exactly what he asked," Thomas said reassuringly. "You stayed put, and now safe people have found you. We're going to help you." William felt his heart sink as he looked at the deepening shadows in the forest. Sunset was approaching, and the temperature would drop quickly after that. Whatever had happened to Jack's father, they couldn't leave this frightened boy alone as darkness fell. "We'll help you find your daddy," William promised, extending his hand toward Jack. "But first, let's get you somewhere safe. Are you hungry?" Jack nodded again, looking less afraid now. Thomas pulled a granola bar from his pocket and unwrapped it for the boy. As Jack took small, cautious bites, William and Thomas stepped aside to talk quietly. The situation was serious. They were 5 miles from the trailhead, with limited supplies and a group of scouts depending on them. And now they had a lost child whose father was missing under mysterious circumstances. What had happened in these woods today? And what were they going to do now? As twilight deepened in the forest, the tall pines cast long shadows across the clearing. Scoutmaster Thomas gathered his troop in a tight circle, speaking in hushed tones so Jack couldn't hear every word. The small boy sat on a fallen log nearby, wrapped in Oliver's spare jacket that was much too big for him. His legs dangled above the ground as he nibbled on a granola bar, watching the scouts with cautious eyes. "We're 5 miles from the nearest road," Thomas explained quietly to his senior scouts. "And we have no phone signal out here. We need to make a decision quickly before it gets completely dark." William ran a hand through his hair, looking concerned. "We can't just leave him here." "Of course not," Oliver agreed quickly. "That would be wrong." "But we can't all stay either," William countered, glancing at the younger scouts who were growing tired and anxious. "The younger boys need to get back to camp." "And whatever happened to Jack's father?" He lowered his voice even more. "It might not be safe for us to stay in this area." Jack looked up then, his eyes wide and worried. He slid off the log and walked slowly toward the group of older boys. "Are you going to leave me?" he asked, his small voice trembling. Thomas knelt beside the boy, putting himself at Jack's eye level. "No, Jack. We won't leave you alone. I promise." He paused, speaking gently. "Can you tell us more about what happened today? Why were you and your daddy in the forest?" Jack looked down at his muddy shoes, then back up at Thomas. "Daddy and me were camping over by the big rocks." He pointed vaguely to the east. "Then some men came to our tent very early this morning. Daddy looked really scared when he saw them." The scouts exchanged glances as Jack continued. "He grabbed me in our backpack and we ran into the woods. We ran for a really long time." Jack's voice grew smaller. "Then Daddy heard something behind us. He told me to hide under the big tree and not move until he came back or until someone safe found me." Thomas placed a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. "Did your daddy say anything else?" Jack nodded slowly. "He said he would lead the bad men away from me. Then he would get help and come back." Tears welled in his eyes. "But he didn't come back." Thomas and William shared a concerned look over Jack's head. This wasn't a simple case of a child wandering off from a campsite. Something serious was happening, possibly dangerous. "We need to split the troop," Thomas decided after a moment of thought. "William, take the younger scouts back to the main camp. Alert the rangers about what's happened and bring help." William nodded, already mentally planning the quickest route back. "I'll stay with Oliver, Henry, and George," Thomas continued. "We'll bring Jack out safely using the Eastern Trail. It's longer but easier for a child to manage." As the scouts prepared to separate, dividing their supplies and making sure both groups had first aid kits and emergency whistles, Jack tugged gently on Thomas's sleeve. "My daddy said good people would find me," he whispered, looking up with eyes that seemed too knowing for such a young child. "Are you good people?" Thomas smiled gently. "Yes, Jack. We're here to help you. That's what scouts do." The simple answer seemed to satisfy Jack. For the first time since they'd found him, a small smile appeared on his face. William gathered the younger scouts, giving last-minute instructions. "Stay together, no wandering off. We move quickly but safely." Before they departed, William knelt in front of Jack. "Don't worry. We'll send help back for you and your dad." Jack nodded bravely, though his lower lip trembled slightly. "Thank you." As William's group disappeared down the trail, Thomas turned to his small remaining team. "Right, boys. Let's get Jack safely out of here before it gets completely dark." Oliver offered his hand to Jack, who took it after only a moment's hesitation. "Have you ever seen an owl in the wild?" Oliver asked, trying to distract the boy as they began walking. "No," Jack replied, perking up slightly. "Are there owls here?" "Loads of them," Oliver said. "If we're quiet, we might hear them calling as it gets darker." As the small group set off along the eastern trail, the forest around them grew dim. The first stars appeared overhead through gaps in the canopy. Despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, Jack walked a little taller between his new protectors. Sometimes, kindness from strangers is exactly what's needed in the darkest moments. And tonight, as they made their careful way through the shadowy woods, the scouts' simple act of compassion was like a lantern in the growing darkness, guiding them all forward together. Night descended rapidly as Thomas, Oliver, Henry, George, and Jack began their trek down the eastern path. The forest changed in the darkness. Familiar trees became strange shapes. Animal sounds filled the quiet, making Jack jump at every hoot and rustle. "It's just an owl," Thomas assured him when a screech came from above. He kept his flashlight beam steady on the narrow trail ahead. Jack tried bravely to keep up, but his little legs soon grew tired. The boy stumbled on a root, catching himself on Henry's arm. "You okay?" Henry asked. Jack nodded, but his face showed his exhaustion. He had been through too much today. "Hop on," Oliver offered, kneeling down with his back to Jack. "I'll give you a piggyback ride." Jack looked uncertain at first, then climbed onto Oliver's back. His small arms wrapped tightly around Oliver's neck. As they walked, Jack spoke more freely than before. The gentle motion of being carried seemed to loosen his tongue. "Daddy and me live in a flat in the city," he said. "It's on the 5th floor and you can see the park from our window." "That sounds nice," George commented, walking beside them. Jack nodded against Oliver's shoulder. "Daddy said we needed a holiday in the woods, but he kept looking worried. He made us leave in the middle of the night 3 days ago." Thomas listened carefully, trying to piece together what might have happened to this boy and his father. Whatever trouble they were in had followed them here to the forest. The first drops of rain fell lightly on the leaves above them. Within minutes, the gentle patter became a steady downpour. The scouts pulled out their rain jackets, but the water soon soaked through in the heavy rain. "There!" Henry pointed ahead to where the trail passed beneath a large rock overhang. "We can wait it out there." They hurried to the natural shelter, shaking water from their clothes as they huddled beneath the stone. Thomas spread an emergency blanket on the driest part of the ground, and Oliver gently set Jack down. The boy's earlier fear had given way to exhaustion. His eyes kept closing despite his efforts to stay awake. "You can sleep if you want to," Thomas told him kindly. "We'll be right here watching over you." "Promise?" Jack asked, his voice heavy with tiredness. "Promise," all 4 scouts said together. Jack's head nodded forward, and within minutes he was asleep against Oliver's side, wrapped in an emergency blanket that crinkled with each breath he took. "Look," George whispered, pointing to the inside of Jack's jacket collar where a tag was visible. "Jack Thompson, Westview Primary," he read quietly. "At least we know his full name now," Thomas said. "That will help when we reach the Rangers." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the forest in stark white light. Thunder crashed almost immediately after, shaking the ground beneath them. Jack startled awake with a frightened cry. "The bad men," he gasped, disoriented from sleep. "They had guns." "You're safe," Thomas assured him, placing a hand on Jack's small shoulder. "It's just a storm. The thunder can't hurt you." Jack looked around wildly for a moment, then seemed to remember where he was. His breathing slowed, but his eyes remained wide with fear. "Were there really men with guns?" George asked gently. Jack nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. "They came to our tent this morning. Daddy saw them first. He grabbed me and ran." The scouts exchanged worried glances. This was more serious than they had first thought. Seeing Jack's frightened face, Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a small torch. "Want to see something cool?" he asked, clicking it on. He held the light against his fingers, creating shadow puppets on the rock wall. "Look, a rabbit!" To everyone's relief, Jack's fear began to fade as he watched the shadows play across the stone. Soon, his frightened tears turned to small giggles. "My daddy does that too," Jack said, his face brightening. "He makes a rabbit just like that when I'm scared at night." "Your daddy sounds like a good man," Thomas said gently. Jack nodded solemnly. "He is. He tells me stories and makes the best pancakes." His smile faded. He said sometimes we have to be brave even when we're scared. That's good advice, Thomas agreed. And you've been very brave today, Jack. Outside their shelter, the storm raged on. Rain poured down in sheets, and lightning flashed across the sky. But inside, under the rock overhang, Jack's fear slowly melted away in the company of his protectors. Henry continued making shadow puppets. George shared a chocolate bar he had been saving. Oliver taught Jack a quiet clapping game. And Thomas kept watch, worried about what tomorrow might bring but determined to keep this small boy safe through the night. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who had become protectors, Jack found comfort. His small hand reached out to hold Oliver's, and he leaned his head against the older boy's arm, trusting completely. The rain stopped around midnight, leaving behind a forest dripping with water. Every surface glistened in the faint moonlight that now broke through the clouds. Thomas checked his watch and looked at the sleeping boy. Jack had finally drifted off, curled up against Oliver's side under the emergency blanket. "We should move on," Thomas whispered to the scouts. "The path will be muddy, but I'd rather reach the ranger station before dawn." They gently woke Jack, who blinked sleepily at them. "We need to keep walking," Thomas explained kindly. "Do you think you can do that?" Jack nodded bravely, though his eyes were still heavy with sleep. "I'll carry you," Thomas offered, turning to let Jack climb onto his back. Their small group moved carefully down the trail, which had turned slick with mud after the heavy rain. The scouts used their flashlights sparingly, not wanting to draw attention in the darkness. Jack rested his head against Thomas's shoulder, occasionally pointing out shadows that looked like animals or monsters. "That's just a tree stump," Thomas would assure him, and Jack would nod seriously. They had been walking for nearly an hour when Oliver suddenly froze, raising his hand in a signal to stop. "I hear something," he whispered. They all stood perfectly still, listening. At first, there was only the normal forest sounds, dripping water, rustling leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl. Then they heard it, voices, and the unmistakable beams of flashlights moving up the trail toward them from below. Thomas quickly pulled everyone behind a large oak tree. "Rangers wouldn't be here yet," he said quietly. "And they'd call out to identify themselves." Jack stirred on Thomas's back, blinking groggily. Before they could quiet him, he saw the distant flashlight beams and gasped loudly. "The bad men," he whispered, his small body suddenly rigid with fear. Thomas acted instantly. "Off trail. Now." They scrambled away from the path, pushing through wet underbrush and sliding down a small slope. Thomas found a dense thicket of bushes, and they all crawled beneath the low branches. Jack, now fully awake, buried his face against Thomas's chest to stifle his frightened breathing. The voices grew closer. Flashlight beams swept through the trees near the trail. "The kid's gotta be around here somewhere," a gruff voice said. "Boss wants him found before sunrise." "What if he's with his old man?" another voice asked. "Not possible," came the reply. "We know where his father is. It's just the boy we need." Jack trembled violently against Thomas, who held him protectively. The scouts huddled together in silence, barely daring to breathe as the men passed near their hiding spot. Thomas made a quick decision. He pressed his emergency whistle into Oliver's hand and whispered instructions into his ear. Then he carefully handed Jack to Henry. "Keep him safe," Thomas whispered. "No matter what happens, get to the ranger station." Before they could stop him, Thomas crawled away from the group. When he was about 50 yards away, he stood up and deliberately snapped a large branch under his foot. "Hello there," he called out loudly. "Forest Service Patrol. Identify yourselves." The flashlight beams immediately swung in his direction. Thomas took off running, crashing through the underbrush in the opposite direction from where the scouts remained hidden. The men shouted and gave chase, their lights bobbing as they pursued what they believed was a lone ranger. "Now," Oliver whispered once the lights and voices had faded into the distance. "We move fast. Henry, you've got Jack. George, help me find the trail again." They emerged from their hiding place, hearts pounding. Henry lifted Jack onto his back, whispering reassurance to the frightened boy. "Will Mr. Thomas be okay?" Jack asked, his voice small and worried. Yes, Henry assured him, though his own face showed concern. He's very clever and knows these woods well. He'll lead those men away and meet us later. They found the trail again and moved downhill as quickly as they dared on the slippery path. The moon provided just enough light to see the way. Jack clung tightly to Henry, his small body shaking less now. You're very brave, George told Jack as they hurried along. Your father will be proud of you. Jack's face brightened a little at the mention of his father. Do you think we'll find him soon? I hope so, Oliver said honestly. The Rangers will help us. They continued their descent through the dark forest, for souls bound together by danger and trust. Behind them somewhere, their leader was risking himself to keep them safe. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also hope. Jack rested his cheek against Henry's shoulder, watching the forest pass by. Despite his fear, the boy's courage never faltered, a reminder that sometimes the smallest among us can show the greatest strength. The first light of dawn painted the sky pink and gold as Oliver, Henry, George, and Jack finally emerged from the forest. The ranger station stood before them, a wooden building with a green roof and a tall radio tower beside it. Lights glowed in the windows, a welcome sight after their long, frightening night. We made it, Oliver said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Jack had fallen asleep on Henry's back during the last mile of their journey, but now he lifted his head, blinking at the building. Is this where the good people are? He asked sleepily. Yes, Henry assured him. The Rangers will help us find your dad. They stumbled up the gravel path to the front door. George knocked, his muddy knuckles leaving marks on the wood. The door swung open almost instantly. A tall woman in a ranger uniform stood there, her face showing surprise at the sight of them. My goodness, she exclaimed. You must be from Troop 142. We've had search teams out looking for you all night. She ushered them inside to a warm room with comfortable chairs and a fireplace. Another ranger, a man with a thick beard, quickly brought them blankets and hot chocolate. Jack's eyes widened at the sight of the steaming mug placed in his small hands. Thank you, he whispered, taking a careful sip. The female ranger knelt in front of Jack. Hello there. I'm Ranger Emma. Can you tell me your name? I'm Jack Thompson, he replied. My daddy is lost in the forest. While Jack spoke with Ranger Emma, Oliver pulled the bearded ranger aside and quickly explained everything, finding Jack, the men who had chased them, and Scoutmaster Thomas's brave diversion. Thomas used his whistle to signal his location, Oliver explained. 3 short blasts, 3 long, 3 short. SOS in Morse code. Can you find him? The ranger's face grew serious. He spoke quietly into his radio, calling for a search team to assemble immediately. Soon, the station bustled with activity as more rangers arrived, putting on gear and checking equipment. We've contacted the police, Ranger Emma explained to the boys. Jack's father has been missing since yesterday. He's an important witness in a criminal case. Jack sat wrapped in a blanket, watching the commotion with wide eyes. A kind-faced policewoman sat beside him, asking gentle questions. My daddy's name is Robert Thompson, Jack told her. He works in a big office with lots of computers. He's a witness. That's what he told me when we ran. Hours passed slowly. The scouts dozed in their chairs, exhausted from their ordeal. Jack refused to sleep, watching the door anxiously. Every time it opened, his head would snap up, hope shining in his eyes, only to dim when it wasn't his father. Near midday, they heard the unmistakable sound of helicopter blades. Jack pressed his face to the window as the aircraft landed in the clearing outside the station. The door burst open, and several rangers rushed out to meet it. When the helicopter's door slid open, a muddy, tired Scoutmaster Thomas emerged first. Jack gasped with delight, but his eyes remained fixed on the helicopter. A moment later, another man stepped out, tall, with the same blue eyes as Jack. Daddy! Jack screamed. The blanket fell forgotten to the floor as he ran across the room and out the door. Robert Thompson dropped to his knees in the gravel, arms wide. Jack flew into his embrace, nearly knocking him over. Robert held his son tightly, tears streaming down his face as he whispered words only Jack could hear. The scouts watched from the doorway, their own eyes wet with tears of relief. Thomas joined them, putting his hands on Oliver and Henry's shoulders. "You did it," he said proudly. "You got Jack to safety." Later, as police officers took statements and medical staff checked everyone for injuries, the full story emerged. Robert Thompson had discovered illegal activity at the financial firm where he worked. When he agreed to testify, threats came against his family. He and Jack had been moved to a safe house, but somehow their location had been discovered. "Your scouts saved both their lives," the police inspector told Thomas. "Robert's testimony will bring down a criminal operation worth millions." As the scouts prepared to leave, Jack ran up to them, a small plastic badge pinned to his clean shirt, a junior ranger badge the staff had given him. "My daddy says you're heroes," he said, looking at each scout with serious eyes. Oliver knelt down to Jack's level. "We just did what scouts are supposed to do," he said with a smile. "Help others when they need it." Jack hugged each scout tightly. His father stood nearby, watching with grateful eyes. "When I grow up," Jack whispered to Henry during their hug, "I want to be brave like you." Outside, the sun shone brightly on the forest. The darkness and fear of the night had passed, replaced by the warmth of reunion and the simple, powerful knowledge that even the smallest acts of kindness and courage can change lives forever.